Hi, this is Catherine Schneider from the Fitchburg Historical Society, and we are continuing our series on the Fitchburg Library and how it came to be, and all the work and effort that went into create this wonderful library that we have here in Fitchburg. And today we have as our guest Marykay Zimbrick, who is here as the first vice president of the Fitchburg Library, as well as having worked on the capital campaign to make the library come into existence, the financial end of things. So welcome, Marykay.
Thank you. Thank you.
First question I'd like to find out is, could you talk a little bit about your connections to Fitchburg?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And thank you for having me today. I think the history of the library is a really important one to keep track of. There's many of us in our community that are very proud of the library and are proud to be a part of its origins. My husband and I moved to Fitchburg 28 years ago in January. Coldest day of the year, I think, is when we moved. And we had built a home in Lacey Heights. And so we felt like it was a great community to raise our kids, which we did. They were all part of the public school system here. And we've been here ever since.
Great, great. So a community you moved into and then took up the mantle of the needs looking at the library. It sounds like that was something that really called to you. So when and how did you come to be involved in the effort to create a library in Fitchburg?
Well, moving from Madison, I always thought it was odd that Fitchburg didn't have its own library. But then back then, Fitchburg was still a small community and a growing community. So we'd go to the library in Verona, or we'd go to the library at Meadowood, or we'd go to one of the other Madison libraries with our kids. And I just always wondered why we didn't have one. And so then in 2005, Mayor Clowder called me one day and said, "Hey, I hear you've been involved in libraries in the past, and I'm wondering if you'd be interested in getting involved in Fitchburg. We have a citizens committee that's looking at the feasibility of a library." So I went to a couple of meetings, met everyone that was involved, and then the project just sort of took off from there.
Okay. So you got a call from the mayor and you responded yes.
I did. It was one of the best calls I think I ever took.
All right, great. And so what were the initial steps taken to begin the process of having a Fitchburg library?
Well, like I mentioned, the library started as a citizens committee, a mayor's committee. And so we had really no power, no funding. We were just an advisory committee, sort of a group of interested citizens. And we talked about what it would take to build a library, what it would take to get the support for a library. And as Jane Keene, who was the first library board president, and I quickly found out as we did some research, the state of Wisconsin had some pretty strict rules and regulations on having a public library in your community. And one of those processes included having an official library board that was sanctioned by not only the state, but also your local governmental entity. And so we started the process then, talking with the city administrator, talking with council members, talking with other members of the committee, and explained why we had to go through this legal process to become an official library board. And by doing that, we opened ourselves up to the ability to go for grant funding. We had the opportunity to participate in the county-wide library tax, and so that money could come back to us when we had a library. All of these things were required to have a library in the state.
I see. So it was actually a legal process then that you found out needed to be done in order to proceed then. The library board was an essential building block then for continuing with the idea of creating a library.
Right. We really didn't have any street cred with South Central Library System or the state library system without being an official library board. And so it was really something that was necessary to move forward in a positive way.
Okay. So part of the learning process.
Part of the learning curve that we all had.
A board was needed. So you were a member of that first Fitchburg Library Board. And so what was the library charged with accomplishing after it was created? And then what role did you play in meeting the goals that they had?
Well, we became an official library board in 2007. And that was a big day for us. And at that time, the city council also included a budget, a small budget for us. And so we actually had a purpose, we had a charter, and we had a little bit of money that we could spend for some of the expenses that we knew we would have. So we were basically charged with figuring out what it was going to take from soup to nuts to get a library built in the city of Fitchburg. So one of the big things we had to start working on was passing a referendum, because we knew that we wouldn't be able to build a library without that. Mayor Clowder felt very strongly that the people of Fitchburg needed to have a say in whether or not we were going to spend city funding to build a library. So we started talking about, how do we create interest in a library? How do we pass a referendum to build a library? We had to hire architects, we had to hire a builder, we had to figure out what the staffing was going to look like, what the collection was going to look like, and how that was going to be funded. So there were a million different things that the library board had to do. And so Jane, in her role as president, me as vice president, we sort of steered the ship and came up with a plan of how we might go about that. And we were lucky that we had other people involved in the process. We had the Friends of the Fitchburg Library was instrumental in getting the word out about what is a library for a community and why is it important. And then we had a number of other people that had expertise in building or in library science that stepped up to the plate. We were able to hire an interim library director. Her name was Deborah Johnson, and she really steered the ship in the right direction as a consultant and as someone who had helped build multiple libraries around the state and in Illinois. She knew what we needed to do, who we needed to talk to, and how to go about getting this done in a way that worked for the city.
It sounds like you found exactly the right people to help move this forward.
Yeah, we were incredibly lucky to have the people that we had working on the project. Like I said, Deb Johnson was, bar none, I think, probably just a gift to our organization, and she came to us at just the right time. And so, since none of us had a background in library science or had never actually been involved in building a community library in Wisconsin, she knew what needed to be done. And so she knew we were on the right track, and she just helped us stay focused. So she had an office in City Hall. She worked very closely with the city administrator and other members of the city team to help get things rolling for us.
So there were I'm just struck by the way things came together with, just as you said, just the right people, but also the dedication of each entity, each person that was involved in it. So how were the Fitchburg residents able to access library services prior to the building of a library? In other words, the need was there for people to have library services. And then why did you see a need for Fitchburg to have its own library if there were other places, like you mentioned, going to Meadowood or the Verona Public Library that your family had used? So maybe talking a little bit about the impetus for a Fitchburg library.
Well, I think with respect to having our own library, one thing that became abundantly clear to the committee members, or it was a belief that we all held, was that a library is a community gathering spot. And the world of libraries was changing back in 2005, 2007, when we were involved in this project. It wasn't the library that many of us grew up with anymore. Technology was changing in dramatic and incredibly fast ways that some people thought was putting libraries out of business. Other people looked at it as an opportunity for libraries to reinvent themselves. And we were on the cusp of being able to create something without any baggage of what a library had been like. But having said that, I think probably one of our most difficult things was convincing people in Fitchburg that we could have a library and it was a necessary thing, because we got a lot of feedback, and it was honest feedback that, hey, I didn't need a library to raise my kids in this town. Why do we need one? And we pointed out that not only the community factor, but again, the way that libraries are set up in the state of Wisconsin, we all pay to the Dane County library tax, whether we have a library in our community or not. So all of those dollars that we pay in library tax, went to fund 12 hours of the library's bookmobile that we got every week in Fitchburg. And then the rest of it was dispersed to the libraries where our residents were checking books out, because it was basically a per book payment that was made. That's very simplified, but that's basically what it was. And so we felt like we could bring all those tax dollars back into our community, and that was going to be our base for having an operating budget to run our own library. We just had to figure out how to get a library built. And at the time, we were in the middle of the financial crisis of 2007, 2009. People were justifiably very concerned about finances, including the city. And so it became really problematic on whether or not we were going to even be able to pass a referendum. And the city council was justifiably concerned about spending that money. And so we went out to referendum, and we had the Friends of the Fitchburg Library and many of their members who were school teachers and people who had a passion for libraries, beating the streets, dropping literature, talking to people about why a library was so important for Fitchburg, even during these times. And we were one of maybe 2 or 3 library referendums in the entire country that passed that year. Oh. Everybody else was denied, and because of the financial crisis. So we felt incredibly lucky that our referendum passed, and we felt a commitment to the citizens of Fitchburg that they trusted us to do this. And so we as a library board and as a friends group worked very hard to build more trust, create an environment for people to feel like a library was something that we wanted to have. And the friends group did a great job with their book sales to raise awareness. They had all sorts of community events, children's story time, all sorts of things to really build that enthusiasm and excitement for the library that was coming.
It just strikes me that you had, even in difficulty and challenge, there was deep commitment also to follow through on this idea that a library was very important for the community. Just a great deal of commitment to that. Well, and then would you describe both the challenges and maybe rewards that came from serving on the Fitchburg Library Board before there was even the physical presence of a library?
Well, I think probably the biggest challenge that we had was maintaining the momentum that we had created pre-financial crisis, and keep that going and prove to the city that and the council that we could indeed raise the funds that it was going to take to build the library after the referendum was passed. And probably one of the silver linings that came in all of that is that once we were in the middle of this process and we started looking at the bidding process, we realized that we were going to be able to take advantage of a building environment that we probably would have never been able to do years earlier, because there just wasn't that much building going on. And so contractors were hungry, the bids were very competitive, and it's one of the reasons I think we were able to build the beautiful library that we were able to build. I mean, we would have never been able to afford the geothermal system that the library has 5 years earlier, because the pricing wasn't there for it. But in the middle of this hardship that everybody was going through, there was this silver lining of an opportunity to really do some things in the library that would make a difference over the years and carry it forward for the next 50 to 100 years. So we tried to make some decisions based on that. Putting in the underground parking, which the city was really adamant that we have parking under the building, not only to make it easy for people to use the library on days like today when it's really cold and icy, but also staying true to their commitment of being a green city and not taking up a lot of space with the footprint of the building. So by going up, we were able to do a lot rather than spreading it all out and taking up some of that beautiful open space that we have in front of the library all the way down to Fish Hatchery. So those sorts of things. And I think, continuing with the funding of the library and helping people understand that the increase in their property taxes was going to be worth it, meeting the goal that we had set for our capital campaign, which was really quite small. It was $2.5 million in comparison to the price of the library. So the library came in, or the city came in and said, we will fund you up to this much money, which was 14.5. And then the rest of this has to be privately raised. And if you can't privately raise it, you can't build a library. And so raising, even though that seems like a pretty small amount when you look at some other capital campaigns at the time, it was quite difficult to raise that money. And we were grateful for Bill Linton of ProMega stepping in as our lead donor right away and practically cutting that in half with a $1 million donation. And we only had to raise, it was 3.1, not 2.1. But we only had to raise a small amount compared to what he had kicked us off with. So that was a big incentive for us. So that was a huge reward to have that. He was able to get a couple other businesses in town, Bruker, Thermo Fisher Scientific, all gave very, very generous donations to the library. And then we had just everyday businesses in our community step up. And whether it was in-kind donations for events that we were having, or it was donations of any size, really, they just stepped up. And the people in Fitchburg stepped up. And whether it was somebody giving $20 in memory of their grandmother or $100,000 because they believed in our project, the citizens of Fitchburg just really stepped up and helped us meet that goal.
And I can see on your face your just your gratitude and joy in seeing that from your position on the library board. All of that coming forth from the community, the support that was there. And
I would say that there was an extraordinary amount of teamwork in the process. Phil Sviam, who's also a member of the library board, was my co-chair on the capital campaign. The Madison Community Foundation managed all of our money for us. The donations went straight to them, and they did all of the accounting and the auditing for us, and that was helpful. The city wanted us to have somebody, a third party, manage all the money, and we were very grateful that they were able to do that for us as well. So it made it easy for Phil and I to talk to people about raising money without having to worry about all of the back of house things that needed to be done.
What a story to hear all these details. Not only the timing, in some ways blessings out of the timing, even though it was a recessionary time to do all this fundraising, but then the stepping forward of so many from business and private sources for helping to finance the library, Friends of the Fitchburg Library, and all that they had done. Just truly a community effort. Well, as you're looking back on your time on the library board, maybe what's your fondest memory?
Boy, that's a hard question, because I have a couple. I think towards the end of the project, when Chris Gruneberg, who was also a member of the library board, but she was in charge of hiring for us. She took on that very important role. She and her team did all the interviewing for a library director. And her first great hire was Deb Johnson for us. Her second great hire, with Deb Johnson helping, was Wendy Rawson, our library director. And when I met our library director for the first time, and she had agreed to come to Madison, I thought, wow, this is going to be really amazing. Because that's the one thing that keeps you up at night, is you put all this into place and you put your heart and soul into it, and you have to find somebody who's equally as passionate about it and willing to take on the job of a brand new library in a community. It's a horrific job. She had to hire her staff and pick the books and do all sorts of things. I mean, she just had a never-ending list of chores. And so I think seeing those two women work together to really bring the library to fruition, so that I looked up the date, June 29th, 2011 is when we opened the library. That was just an amazing day. It was so exciting to be be at the library, cut the ribbon, see people there, see kids run to the book section, see them try out all the furniture, the oohs and the ahs, and that was probably the best day. Best day ever.
Oh, wonderful to hear. To just hear your enthusiasm, your reward for all that you'd put into this through the years. Since 2005, your initial involvement in the library, from your call from Mayor Clowder through all the years that you worked on making this happen. Well, in what ways are you most pleased about how the Fitchburg Public Library serves the community?
Well, I mentioned earlier how libraries were sort of on the cusp of redefining themselves in the age of technology. And I think we jumped in at a great time. We didn't have a history we had to contend with. We could create our own history. And I think the Fitchburg Library has really found its niche in our community. It serves people in ways that even 20 years ago we couldn't imagine a library would be used, because we didn't know what the technology was going to be. We just knew it was coming. And so we've created an institution in our community that can serve everyone, whether you want a place to read the New York Times every day, whether you want a place where your kids can come to story time and enjoy the heated floor, in the story time room, whether you have someone who just wants to study, do a little bit of work, look at the large print books, enjoy the media collection, or take advantage of the incredible online collection that is part of the Fitchburg Library as part of the library consortiums here in Wisconsin that we're a part of. So I think the library continues to grow and evolve. We have meeting space for the community that's used all the time. But if you want to just go over there and pick a book off a shelf and find a comfortable chair, you can do that for a couple of hours too on a cold, snowy day. So I'm just thrilled with the way that people continue to use the library and meeting new families that move into the neighborhood where I live. They can't believe that we didn't have a library when we first moved to town. And it's just such a foreign concept to them. So I'm glad we're at the point where people don't remember not having a library in Fitchburg. I think that's wonderful.
And to think that you started when you moved here not having a library, and then doing so much to help bring it about by serving on the library board, first library board, and then in also being the capital campaign and helping to coordinate that. And then to have this wonderful library, which I'll mention the Fitchburg Historical Society is so grateful for our space there too on the second floor, and the wonderful meeting room where we have our meetings also. So just another example of how our aspect of the community has made use of the library space also. And to also mention that the Fitchburg Historical Society has a website, fitchburghistory.org, where this interview will be placed for people to enjoy the story, along with the other interviews that we've had with the story of the library, with Wendy Ralston, who is the library director that you mentioned, and Barbara Matthews of the original Friends of the Fitchburg Library. So we are so grateful that you came to tell us further, take us more deeply into the story of the Fitchburg Library and all that goes into making that library part of what your neighbors now can move into the Fitchburg community with their children and say, of course there's a library here. What else in this beautiful community? So thank you, Marykay.
Thank you for having me.